In my third and final video looking at the Marvel Legends Retro Fantastic Four line, I'm going to review and mop up the remaining figures released as part of this line. Now, I've held off from making this video for a couple of months because I've been waiting for the release of these Skrull Army Builder figures. Now, these were originally slated for release around about December 21, which would have been very nice timing because that's obviously when we got the Invisible Woman and the Human Torch standard release here as well, because they were a little bit delayed from the other figures in the wave. However, sadly, the Skrulls were pushed back, but I finally got mine through the post this weekend. And I appreciate that. Many of you are probably wondering, well, why wait for the Skrull since they're not officially part of this Fantastic Four retro wave? Well, I thought it'd be nice to round out the collection because I've always thought of the Skrulls really as being part of the Fantastic Four universe. I know, of course, they play a much larger role within the Marvel universe and have shown up in many different titles, but for me personally, I always associate them as being really a Fantastic Four villain. So without further ado, let's start with the Invisible Woman. The packaging here, of course, is very consistent with the other figures in the line. We have that wonderful 90s Toy Biz packaging, just on a much larger scale, and we have that wonderful round bubble packaging there, and a nice image in the bottom right hand corner there on the sort of banner image, which is nicely rendered. On the reverse, we have that same image at the top there. Again, we have that sort of star field in the background, which is very nice. We have a little bit of blurb about the character, and of course we have the full lineup of the other figures in the wave. So this is very retro, this is very nostalgic, and I'm a huge fan of it. Moving on to the figure itself, probably not too many surprises with this figure, especially if you'd already picked up the special release, which was the fully translucent version. The key difference here, though, is obviously that this figure is fully painted, so we get to see the full costume, the nice bright blue and white, which I think is very nicely done in the main. However, I do have an issue with this head sculpt. It's the exact same head sculpt as we saw in the translucent figure, but here, obviously, all the features are fully painted in. And as a result, we get a much closer look at this sculpt and what it represents. Now, to me, I'm not a huge fan of this sculpt at all. When I saw the initial promotional images, I was a bit concerned, but I was waiting to hold off until I saw it in the flesh. And I have to say, my fears were confirmed. This doesn't look good to me. First of all, the hair is a solid plastic piece, and that definitely represents problems when it comes to articulation, which we'll touch on in a moment, but there's no washes running through this, so it is just one solid blonde plastic piece, and I think if it just had a nice wash through it, it would have emphasised the sculpt that we've got there. This would have looked a little bit better straight away. Now, there's definitely something wrong with the eyes, in my opinion. Something about this just looks a little bit disconcerting. It just doesn't look very friendly. It just doesn't look like the character that I think of. And there's something a bit mean or a bit sulky about this sculpt, which, I don't know, like I said, it's not what I think of as the Invisible Woman. Now, that might just be me, but this just doesn't ring true for me personally. The body sculpt is that main female type that we've seen replicated across pretty much all the female characters in the modern Marvel Legends from Hasbro, so there's no great surprises here. It's a pretty decent sculpt all round, and it does seem to serve most of the characters pretty well. So the key difference here, I suppose, is the paint apps. It's very nicely done. Obviously, there really is only two tones here, but I think this works pretty well for this character, and I think it's fairly attractive and looks pretty good. So then, articulation. Well, we may as well get straight to it. The head articulation is definitely compromised. There is a ball joint here, so she should be able to turn her head all the way around, and she can do, but there is a lot of resistance from that plastic headpiece, and there's not a lot of give in that head. It isn't a rubber, it is a hard plastic, so this is a real struggle to get the most out of this, definitely, and you can't really move the head up and down. There's a very slight wobble, but not a lot. And you can see that really emphasised here at the back. So yeah, you can get it to move forward a little bit, but that hair is not going any further back. I also noticed, and I thought it was worth pointing out, that she actually has two peg holes in the back here. So the one in the central back makes perfect sense. I'm not sure about this upper top one near the upper shoulder blades. I'm not sure what that is for, whether she was intended to have an extra piece or a stand that was meant to plug into the back here. I don't know, but ultimately we're left with an extra hole that we really don't need. And, thankfully you can cover it with the hairpiece, but it does seem like a strange choice. She does have ball jointed shoulders, so those arms kick up a really healthy distance, which is great. There's also a pin swivel at the elbow, so the lower arm can rotate right the way around, and of course it hinges to about 90 degrees as well, so pretty solid stuff. And then she's got another pin swivel at the wrist, so the hand can rotate right the way around, and of course it hinges forwards and backwards as well, all the way, which is pretty solid. So she's got A ball joint in the chest, so of course she can spin from side to side, she can lean left and right as well, and of course she can also lean forwards and backwards, and there's a pretty healthy range of motion here. Definitely stronger leaning backwards than leaning forwards though. There is of course a hinge at the hip, allowing the legs to kick all the way out. This is supported by an upper thigh swivel as well, and the legs of course can kick forwards, they can kick backwards a little bit, and then she has double jointed knees as well, so really kick those legs up, which is great. And then finally there is that ankle pivot at the very bottom here as well, so of course the ankle can slide from side to side, and of course it hinges as well, so it can go forwards and backwards. She does also come with a couple of accessories, although she's pretty light in this department. She comes with an extra pair of fists, and she has her invisible force field shield. And we've seen this before because it has been recycled from a previous Invisible Woman release. And for a point of comparison, here she is standing next to the translucent version of this figure. As you can see, it is exactly the same mould. Obviously, the only key difference here is that she is fully painted in. So, all in all, this isn't a terrible figure. I'll probably give it 3 stars, but I definitely feel a little bit disappointed by it all in all. I think I really like this character for a start. I think I really like this particular look for the character, the costume. I don't mind the accessories that she comes with. It's a little light. It would have been nice if she had something extra as well, but I think this is absolutely fine. The key thing that really lets this figure down for me is that head sculpt. It just spoils the whole thing in my opinion. Okay, so next up we have the Human Torch. Now, in terms of the packaging, this is pretty much what you'd come to expect by this point. It is, of course, that same retro branded packaging, which I think is really very attractive. I think it's very displayable if you put it on a peg, on the shelf, on your wall, whatever you want to do with it. I think it looks really colourful and really fun. And again, we have that image of the Human Torch there, which is nicely illustrated and just lends it that little bit of cartoony sort of comic book feel, which I think is really a really fun element. Now, we've had no shortage of Human Torch figures across the years from the Marvel Legends line, and this one obviously is the exact same body mold as we've seen with the Flame Off Johnny Storm version. Across all the various releases of the Human Torch in the Marvel Legends line across the years, I've had very, very mixed feelings about each release. Some have been closer than others, but none have really quite managed to nail it for me. But anyone who saw my review of the special Johnny Storm version will know I was a huge fan of that figure. And I have to say, that is definitely translated into this Flame On version as well. I really like this head sculpt, and I like that we have these extra flames as well. There's this fantastic flame piece which you can remove from the shoulders, and you can have him without that extra piece as well, which is pretty cool. Now, without though, I will say, it does look a little bit incongruous. Those shoulders look a little bit too high. It doesn't look quite in proportion without that flame piece on there. So I think it definitely looks better with it. If you remove it, not so much. Now, one of the things they've reintroduced with this version of the Human Torch is those sort of charred line effects as we used to see in the comic books. I really like this. This to me definitely feels much more like the Human Torch. Really glad to see this reintroduced into the figure, and I think it looks pretty good. Although I will point out that this doesn't run through the reverse of the figure, so on the back, obviously there are none of these lines, which is a real shame. I think it would have been nice to have kept it consistent and running through the entire figure. Now, this figure is translucent, and I think it works really very well. When we shine a light behind it, he glows up really nice, bright orange and red, and this looks really good. It definitely looks like the Human Torch is on fire, and I think this is a very nice effect. So, all in all, I think this works really well. Now, in terms of articulation, he does have that ball joint in the head. Pretty fantastic range of motion here. You get the most out of this than most Marvel Legends figures, I have to say. He can look all the way around, right the way up, right the way back. Pretty fantastic stuff, so definitely top marks for that. He's got a ball joint in the shoulder, but he also has that butterfly wing in the chest there as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So he can get his arm right the way back and get his arm right the way up as well. So I think this is fantastic stuff. This is supported by a bicep swivel as well, and he has double jointed elbow, so all fantastic stuff. Now, he also has a pin swivel at the wrist, so again the hand can rotate 360 degrees, and of course it hinges forwards and backwards. However, I do need to point out that it really only hinges forwards because, as you'll notice, there is this flame on the back of the hand which really stops it from hinging backwards a great deal. But he has an ab crunch, so of course he can lean all the way back and lean a pretty good distance forwards as well. So again, we're covered here, and he also has that swivel at the waist. So pretty much everything you can think of, really, this figure's got it. He's got the hinge at the hips, of course the legs kick out. He's got that upper thigh swivel as well, and then of course the legs kick forwards, backwards, and again there is a double jointed knees as well, which is fantastic. And also we have that swivel at the calf as well, so fantastic stuff. And then finally, to cap it all off, he's got the ankle pivot as well. So yeah, I can't imagine asking much more from a figure in terms of articulation. He does have a handful of accessories, again, pretty light stuff really, but he's got an extra pair of fists. Now you may notice that these fists actually come without the flame, so you won't have the same problems when it comes to arcing the hand forwards and backwards when it comes to that hinge, which is good. And then he also has these flame effects as well to wrap around the wrists, which seem a little bit unnecessary, but maybe you can wrap them around the legs instead to create that flame effect. And finally, as a point of comparison, here he is with the special release, the Flame Off Johnny Storm, which, you know, I was a huge fan of. Really like this sculpt and the paint apps and everything about this figure, really. And I think these complement each other very well. So I have to say, for me, this is a 5-star figure, much like his counterpart. I just think everything about this figure comes together really well. And I think for me, this is probably my definitive flame on Human Torch figure now. I think everything about it works really well. I think the sculpt is great. I really like that we have those lines painted onto the body as well. And I just think overall it looks solid. And of course, what fantastic articulation. Really, this should be the blueprint for all modern Marvel Legends, in my opinion. I think it's an absolutely fantastic figure. Okay, and then finally today I'm going to take a look at the recently released army builder Skrull. Now this is a special release that obviously comes in very different packaging. This is released through the specialty market, so it isn't something you're going to see on your shelves of your mass market shops. And I have to say, surprisingly, he actually retails slightly cheaper than your standard Marvel Legends. Maybe that's to do with the packaging, I'm not sure, but that's really good news for collectors, because the whole point of this release is that you buy several copies so that you end up building your army of Skrulls. Now, the packaging is a lot smaller. It's a very small box, and yeah, it obviously doesn't have a great deal of artwork on it, but it's still quite attractive. It is just that two-tone. We have the white and we have the sort of reds at play here, but I think, you know, the image that we have is very nicely illustrated, and I think this is still quite serviceable and quite displayable in its own right, really. This is quite a fun little carton that he comes in. Now, there's not an awful lot when it comes to the reverse, though. There's actually just a lot of text here, so this this isn't fantastic, but hey, who's complaining? So the figure himself, of course, is based on a classic Skrull design. I think he works as a generic Skrull. I don't think he's meant to be from any particular era. He just serves really as a generic Skrull that can be represented from any particular story you like. Now, I think the Marvel Legends line is long overdue a comic book accurate Skrull. And I think Hasbro have done a fantastic job with this figure, starting with the head sculpt. I think this is really very nicely done. Of course, we have the lines on the chin, but I think the overall expression on the face here is really mean. And I think they've done a very good job, particularly with the eyes, actually, because they seem a little bit sunken back and painted quite nicely. So he definitely feels like he's got a really authentic sort of stare. He feels like a proper character. The base body is one that we've seen many times before across many different Marvel Legends, but I think it works perfectly well for a soldier body here. I think it's that sort of medium build which works quite nicely. The paint apps are fairly basic. There are, of course, only two tones. We have that bright purple and then we have the much darker purple. I think this works very well in the main. It would have been nice to have a bit more of a wash running through it, a little bit more detail perhaps, to give it a bit more texture and feel a bit more authentic. And you can notice, particularly with the gauntlets at the top of the gloves there, obviously they are just painted on. There's no sculpting there to make it look or feel like it's a proper end to that glove, but nevertheless, I think this serves pretty well. Now then, in terms of articulation, well, he does have the same ball joint that we've seen on the other figures. This works very well, just like with the Human Torch. He can spin his head right the way around, and of course he can look up and down. A really fantastic range of motion here as well, so good stuff. And again, just like the Human Torch, he has that wonderful butterfly joint at the top of the chest there, so he can really stretch his arms back. He's got that ball joint in the shoulder as well, which allows him to kick his arms up. He's got the same bicep swivel and the same double jointed elbow as well. And then of course we see the hinge swivel at the wrist, so all fantastic stuff. Again, he's got that ab crunch, so he can look all the way forwards, all the way backwards. Really healthy range of motion here, and of course all supported by that swivel at the waist. So exactly the same as the Johnny Storm figure, which is fantastic. He's got the hinge hips, so the legs kick out to the side, he's got the upper thigh swivel, and of course the legs kick forwards, backwards, double jointed knees, and he also has the swivel at the top of the boot cut there, and then finally the pivot at the ankle and the hinge. So all in all, this is the exact same body sculpt that we've just seen with the Human Torch. One of my personal favourites, and I think it works fantastically well here as well. He also comes with a surprising amount of accessories. He has an extra head, this scowling head, which is very cool. He has this sort of pistol, and he also has this assault rifle. His hands are really nicely sculpted so he can hold both these weapons with ease. He can get his finger right round onto the trigger of both weapons, and these look pretty cool. These are obviously brand new molds, so we've not seen these weapons before, and I think they look really nice. And when you start to army build and put them together and swap out the heads and the weapons, you really do start to get a sense of the different varieties that you can have on display with these figures and the kind of army you can build. And I think these look absolutely fantastic. So for me, I'm going to give these 4 stars. So I really love the articulation. I think the sculpt on the heads are really good. I think the accessories are really fun as well. The only thing that really lets this down, in my opinion, just cost of that star, is the paint apps aren't fantastic. They're a little bit bland, a little bit basic, and it would have been nice to just add a bit more texturing in there and just make more out of some of the sculpts, particularly on the weapons, for example, which are just one tone, just that plastic piece. It would have been nice to just have a bit more colour or a bit of a paint wash running through, particularly that assault rifle would have been quite nice. So then, all in all, I think a pretty strong collection of figures. Now, in my opinion, the Invisible Woman is probably the weakest of the line, but all that said, I do think this is still a pretty fantastic wave all in all. When we take everything into consideration, most of these figures have been very highly rated by me in terms of what stars I've given them. I think they've all been really fun, really colourful. I think they're fantastic to put on display, and I think they're a really nice collection. If you are a Fantastic Four fan, especially a Fantastic Four fan from the 90s, I can't imagine that you're not going to love these figures. And the addition of the Skrulls just really rounds this collection out, in my opinion. And I think, yeah, they're a pretty fun line, I have to say. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.